Welcome to Transformational Thinking for Health Leaders. I'm Dr. Fiona Day, Master Practitioner Coach and Chartered Coaching Psychologist. This is a podcast that will help you meet your most complex leadership challenges and transform your perspectives, helping you to become a more effective and creative leader with a deeper understanding of yourself and your own world of work. Juliette Alban-Metcalfe is a chartered occupational psychologist and chief executive of Real World Group. She has helped establish Real World Group's assessments of engaging transformational leadership based on uniquely proven research involving tens of thousands of people globally. Juliette has authored numerous articles in various practitioner and peer-reviewed journals, as well as book chapters on leadership, team working and diversity and inclusion, and has published reports and practitioner journal articles. She is currently undertaking a doctorate exploring effective leadership of hybrid teams and consults on behalf of Real World Group with organisations from the UK, North America, Southeast Asia and the wider Asia Pacific region. Welcome to Transformational Thinking for Health Leaders, Juliette.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Juliette, tell us a little bit, if you would, about your journey to becoming a chartered psychologist.
Well, I don't know if it's a typical journey or not, Fiona, but I didn't sort of set out to be a psychologist. My parents are both chartered psychologists, and initially I kind of wanted to do something different just because of wanting to forge my own path. But having grown up with them both talking about different aspects of psychology, with real passion, it was hard to kind of not sort of spark an interest. And so what happened was I did do my undergraduate degree in psychology because I wanted to be a barrister, and I was advised that the best thing to do would be to do something as a specialism first, not go straight into law. So I thought, well, I've always been interested in psychology, so I'll do that first. But then after I graduated, I kind of already caught the bug a bit, and I was debating between a master's in law and a master's in organisational psychology, and ultimately, I can't remember now, it was so long ago, the psychology won out, so I ended up doing that master's instead. And and then chartership was the natural next step. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay, what a fascinating story. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So there was something about kind of thinking that you were going to be doing law, but then the kind of crunch point where you had to make a decision about your master's, and you've chosen the occupational psychology route and then became a chartered psychologist after that as the next step. Yeah, thank you. And I suppose I know that 360 feedback is something that you're very interested in and have done a lot of work, and your organisation's done a lot of research into. I'm kind of curious about how you feel that 360 feedback, how it helps leaders to grow and develop. What's good practice in this area? What's the evidence base behind your own model? And I guess also, why does it matter that 360s are underpinned by evidence-based behavioural models?
Okay, so first of all, one of the most important things that a good leader understands is that they don't have a full awareness of what their impact is on other people. So good leaders understand that we need to constantly be seeking feedback from other people about how is my behaviour working for you in this in terms of what we're doing at the moment. So it might be kind of in terms of how I'm working with you as a direct report, or it could be how do you feel we're working together as colleagues, could be thinking about how they work with stakeholders. But ultimately it's about recognizing that our self-awareness as human beings is somewhat limited, and that's being polite. I mean, people have greater or lesser self-awareness, depending on all kinds of different factors, but as a general rule, we tend not to be fully aware of the impact we're having on other people. And that can be in two different ways. We talk about 360 being really powerful for reducing people's blind spots, and that is of course important. But what's I think is interesting and important to understand is that we often talk about blind spots as a negative thing. So we must reduce somebody's blind spot, or someone, we talk about blind spots like, I've got a terrible blind spot. They don't realise how much they go on about things, or they have a terrible blind spot because they don't realise that actually they're not as good as they think they are at public speaking, or whatever it might be. But actually blind spots can also be positive. And the power of 360 feedback is to provide a leader with, as objective as possible, or, of course, I say objective as possible. You gather multiple perspectives in order to try to create more objective feedback. So let's say you've got a group of 3 direct reports giving feedback. Each person's giving a subjective view of their experience, but together it forms more of an objective view, is what I'm trying to say. And then you gather that feedback from all different stakeholders. Now, when you do that, what it does is it allows the individual to actually understand more about what they're doing well, they didn't realise they do well. What are those things that they just do, without necessarily thinking about it, that people want to see them doing more of? And what are those things that they do that frustrates people or doesn't give them the opportunity to do stuff themselves, or, it could have all kinds of different implications. But basically it's about reducing positive blind spots, that you understand what you do well better, and also reduce negative blind spots so you understand what you might need to change. And by doing those things and gathering all that feedback, then the leader is much better able to, first of all, realise their own potential in terms of influencing others, but also, excitingly, that also enables them to help realise the potential of all of their stakeholders. So they're better able to influence and develop and support staff, or employees. Are much better able to support, develop and collaborate with peers, stakeholders, lead across boundaries, all these things. So it's an incredible opportunity when people are given the chance to do 360 feedback. You can't beat it, basically. That's how it helps. So forgive me, that was quite a long answer to that, but it really is very powerful and very important.
Yeah, and I've used your transformational leadership questionnaire, the TLQ, with probably, I think, about 50 senior medical and public health leaders over the last 5 years or so that I've been working more closely with you. And I really resonate with what you were saying there about the kind of the positive aspects. And I think pretty much for all of them, it's never been about the kind of finding like negative blind spots and things that they need to work on more. It's pretty much all of them have been very much about understanding their strengths and then really growing in confidence significantly, because actually they have much clearer understanding of their own strengths. And in terms of why it matters that a 360 is actually underpinned by an evidence-based behavioural model, Juliette, could you just say a little bit around that and what's kind of good practice in 360s generally?
Yeah, of course. And this is one of the things that particularly concerns me from a health and public health perspective, is the sort of preponderance of 360, or it's also called multi-rater feedback, as your listeners will know, but the preponderance of those assessments or tools that are not based on evidence. And the reason why that really matters, particularly when it comes to a context like health, or in any context, but particularly one where leadership makes such a big difference to the quality of provision. So if you think about all the sort of research around quality of teamwork, quality of leadership, and its impact on patient outcomes, or health populations, or indeed just in terms of its impact on the effectiveness of organisations that have got limited resources but are doing really important stuff, then you realise that actually we need to really ensure that everything we use to intervene in that kind of organisation to in inverted commas develop one aspect or another needs to be based on evidence. We need to make sure that it's the right intervention, that we're not wasting resources, people's time and so on, and it's actually shown to make a difference to leadership. So in the case of Leadership 360, in the ways that really matter. So for example, we're not the only, I don't want to sort of sound as if we're the only organisation with evidence-based tools, because we're not, but we are somewhat unique in that there are more non-evidence-based than evidence-based. But anyway, if I talk about our tools specifically, we've spent the last 20 odd years researching specifically in the health service what are those characteristics in terms of behaviour, or what are those behaviours that leaders enact, and that also later we expanded our research to look at teams, including longitudinal research. What are those things that make the biggest difference to the ability for teams to perform, the ability for teams to innovate, to have change readiness, to have high levels of well-being within the team, to directly impact on measures of patient care, and also to create, through all of those things, to maximise the potential of teams and reduce the opportunity or reduce the risk of harm, because of course we know that the vast majority of errors in the healthcare system are caused by interpersonal dynamics. Quite obviously it's about people, isn't it, and leadership and teams. But so if you, for example, so one of the things that we know is that what really makes a difference, one of the most powerful factors in improving an individual's ability to perform. So in other words, the most influential thing a leader can do with an individual to help them to get the best out of them and enable them to perform to the best of their ability is to show genuine concern for them. It's about the leader showing that they have an interest in the individual, that they care about their aspirations, that they have positive expectations, that they take of that person's ability, that they coach and mentor them when they need it, they're available, those kinds of things. Those are, as an example, the most powerful things a leader can do. Now, if you're applying a 360 tool that isn't including those kinds of factors, then what it's doing is it's diverting the leader's attention from those really, really important and critical and evidence-based factors to something else. So, for example, what worries me deeply is when you see a lot of 360s that are based on, they might be called strengths, some kind of form of strengths, but they're basically looking at, from a 360 perspective, what are the individual's preferences, motivations and values? What are their sort of innate traits? Now those are really useful in certain contexts, but they're not the same as leadership because they have nothing to do with the needs of others. And ultimately, what our research over the last 20 years has shown is that, it won't surprise people to hear, the greatest leaders are the ones that pay attention to the needs of other people in their orbit. So that's just one really basic example of how it's so critical that we ensure that we assess evidence-based factors. Otherwise, we could be doing more harm than good introducing 360.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so important, isn't it? I mean, we have an emerging science around leadership, and we really want to be actively contributing to it and using it. And so to that effect, I know you're undertaking a PhD yourself at the moment. So yeah, please would you just tell us a little bit about your PhD, how it's going and emerging findings? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's actually a professional doctorate in organisational psychology. It's not officially known as a PhD, but the wonderful thing is I will get to be called doctor afterwards, which is very exciting to carry on the family tradition. But basically, what I'm interested in, and it's not, it's not because I'm some kind of psychic, but as COVID, happened, I was in the process of applying for my doctorate, and I'd always been interested in the concept of remote work and whether that made a difference to how leaders need to behave. And then, of course, with COVID, there was an enormous increase in people working hybrid, and of course fully remotely as well. But it seemed like a great opportunity to look at, is there a difference between the leadership that we need in in-person teams and that we need in a hybrid team? And so I've been conducting the research over the last couple of years, and I've been sort of running focus groups. So of course, because it's an emerging area, I was surprised to learn that, to be honest, because I thought, given how long remote teams have existed, particularly with global organisations and so on, and of course if you work in the health service or local government, you'll know that hybrid working has been something that's been around forever. But there is very little research, very little evidence on what makes a difference. So I've started doing qualitative research and been running a whole series of focus groups with different organisations in the public and private sector, finding out about their experiences of leadership, good, bad and indifferent, in that hybrid context. And it's been really fascinating, and I'm sort of surprised and not surprised that the kind of leadership that people want in a hybrid environment is so similar to what they want ideally in an in-person environment. So, it's the same old things. It's they want to be communicated with well, they need to feel trusted, they need to be encouraged to, build social bonds between themselves. They need the leader to create opportunities and to collaborate with their team members. They need to feel that they're being assessed for results rather than how they do their work. I mean, you know, it's not something that you'd ever say, oh, well, we don't need that in an in-person team either. So yeah, it's just been great to kind of reinforce just how important these behaviours are. And my hope is that because, you know, the COVID pandemic sort of helped to illustrate that we don't have the leadership that we need in organisations, that we've always needed in organisations, you know, most organisations don't anyway. I hope that this will be an impetus for organisations to start to genuinely invest in leadership, because of course for many organisations hybrid working is a new thing, albeit it isn't for a lot, like the health service, say, or, you know, local government. So yeah, that's what it's about, and that's what I'm finding, and I'm absolutely, you know, loving it. I just need to find time to finish it.
Wish you well with that, and perhaps you can come back and tell us when you've got the other side of that. And Dr. Alban-Metcalfe.
Yes.
I suppose I was just curious about something you said there in terms of, you know, those kind of social bonds and how important that is, whether you're in person or working remotely or hybrid. And I know that, like me, you're interested in psychological safety, and I suppose I'm just curious, Juliette, your thoughts about what we know about how leaders can create psychological safety and why this matters in the workplace.
So yeah, I mean, psychological safety is absolutely fundamental to the success of all teams, basically. And I think that one of the things that about psychological safety is it's often misunderstood. But basically, what it means is, you know, when people feel that they've got, Professor Amy Edmondson talks about permission for candour. So people feel that they can be honest and open about ideas, suggestions, things that haven't gone well, what they're concerned about, what they haven't done well, mistakes they might have made. So basically there's this ability to talk freely, but, you know, not to the extreme of you know, whinging, for example, or just, you know, because one always complains, and it's not to say that all ideas will be applauded, and it's not to say that, you know, mistakes won't be sanctioned. It's just that, you know, there is more freedom. It's valued when these things are raised as opposed to kind of stifled. So it's been shown through research to make a huge difference in terms of healthcare outcomes, as I'm sure listeners will know, you know, in terms of helping to avoid never incidents and being able to also create innovations and change readiness, which of course are critical in healthcare. But it's been shown all the way up, you know, all the way through to people like Google found that it was one of the key characteristics and the most consistent characteristics of their highest performing teams, above, you know, other things. And so in every environment you can sort of see how critical psychological safety is to organisations thriving. So it's really, really, really important. So leaders need to understand a couple of things. One is that it's not a one-off. You don't sort of do psychological safety with your team and then that's it, you don't worry about it. It's an ongoing thing. So you need to be thinking about, you know, again, it comes down to impact. So understanding and asking, you know, how do people feel in the team? Because psychological safety, you know, when it's absent, people don't feel able to be honest. So when you first start exploring it, you need to try and find ways of gathering feedback in a way that allows people to be anonymous in that feedback, so that if they don't feel psychologically safe, they can say. So it's whether you might want to ask someone that everybody trusts to sort of gather their views on it, or whether you want to do some kind of anonymous survey, but some way of asking for feedback where people don't feel put on the spot is the first thing. And then it's sort of exploring, so, you know, in what ways do I help you to feel psychologically safe? In what ways could I do it differently? Because it might be just that, like, for example, the format of meetings doesn't work for everybody and people don't feel comfortable because they don't feel psychologically safe, you know, in front of colleagues. So that might be something that needs to change. It might be, it can be the leader's behaviour that increases or decreases. It can also be colleagues' behaviour. So, for example, one of the things that leaders need to be reflecting on is, you know, are there members of the team that are particularly cynical or negative, that are inhibiting ideas, suggestions, people being honest about, you know, what they don't know, what they're not sure about. That's a really, really important part of it, because, like, you know, threats to psychological safety can come from all different angles, but the leader needs to be just basically conscious of how people feel about what's happening, how the team works. Could it work better or differently? Is there something I could do better or differently to help you feel more psychologically safe? And then just, the monitoring, not kind of thinking, well, we did that last week or we did that last year, so this year we're going to focus on something else, because it is, a constant thing. So the inquiry bit is the key takeaway, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you for those really practical suggestions. Really helpful to have that. And I'm curious, Juliette, you're a chief executive yourself, you're a kind of world expert on leadership from an academic and a practical perspective. But I'm curious about, what you've really learned from on the job as a chief executive yourself in terms of leadership, and whether that's different or the same as what you've learned kind of academically, theoretically over the years.
Well, I mean, the great thing about me is that because, I've been in real world group for 20 odd years, I've not had to deal particularly with politics. So, I'm very grateful for that. And I think that that's a whole aspect of leadership that people, probably learn on the job, particularly in larger organisations. But certainly, I absolutely empathise with leaders who say, well, there's all this day job to do. When am I going to have time to be engaging? People often kind of use that as they think that's a valid reason to sort of carry on doing what they're doing, and not necessarily starting to do more of the showing genuine concern I talked about earlier on, or the enabling people, the delegating effectively, the sort of building shared vision, all those things that are really important. And I, like I said, I do absolutely empathise with that, because it is really challenging. And when you run a smaller business as well, like ours, I feel like you can never really have enough employees that you don't end up doing multiple roles yourself in some way or another. So, it is dead busy, but you really do need to carve out that time, and you do learn, if you don't, that you don't get the best out of people, and you end up, creating a vicious circle of, well, I'll just do it because I'm so busy, I haven't got time to explain to someone else to do it, so I'll just carry on doing it, and then, you'll forever be too busy. So I think, it's, I do absolutely get that. That's really, really challenging, but somehow or other, you do need to create that time. The other thing I know is really challenging with leaders is, finding time to get their own job done when other people need their support, which I suppose is linked, but again, it has to be done. Otherwise, you end up, you're still on the treadmill. And then there's sort of like the constant, and this is a real challenge still with me and my board. There's this sort of way things need to be done by the book. I don't mean I don't mean in terms of laws or anything, because of course that's like a given. But I mean, so for example, I'm always being encouraged, let's say, to make sure that we never ever start a client assignment before everything is signed and sealed, and purchase order and things like that. And then there's the reality of trying to consult and support senior leaders, who have got incredibly busy diaries, and the procurement side of things, or the contracting part of the organisations, works at a different speed. So that's another challenge, is that kind of balance of, yes, in the business literature, you'd always get all the contracting sorted before you started a piece of work. But I think for the rest of my career, that will continue to be a challenge because of the nature of who we work with. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because we want to be responsive, and agile. That's part of who we are as a business. So yes, I hope that my board will continue to be as wonderfully patient as they have been the last few years.
Thank you. And I was thinking that's, such kind of real world leadership, isn't it? And I was thinking, that is the name of your company as well. But that kind of, the messiness of the real world, and how actually you wouldn't have it any other way, I think is, really lovely insight, isn't it? That, you can follow all systems and processes in a very kind of rigid way, but actually you kind of miss the point at the same time. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's been absolutely fascinating talking with you. I'm kind of feeling really glad that you didn't go down the route of the Masters in Law, and that you chose occupational psychology and all this kind of wonderful and interesting work that you're doing, because, like you were saying, actually, there's very clear evidence, isn't there, around the quality of leadership and and health outcomes, and it's kind of a real responsibility to do that. So I'm really glad that you're bringing that rigour into the work that you're doing, and really grateful that you gave up your time today to talk to us. Thank you ever so much, Juliette.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Fiona. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely to talk about this stuff, because I'm so passionate about it. That, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to share. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to find out more, head over to www.fionadayconsulting.co.uk and you'll receive 3 hours of free CPD, the Health Career Success Programme, when you sign up to my newsletter, and there's loads of other resources to support you as a medical or public health leader on my website too. Thanks for listening.